Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. Grand Rapids, Michigan. Thanksgiving week 2018. A routine midweek night becomes our starting point, not with a scream or a chase, but with a calendar entry and a promise. Ashley Young, 31, has a plan set for the following day tied to housing. Straightforward, adult, verifiable. Friends describe a normal evening out. She is last seen late on November 28th, rolling into the early hours of November 29th at a neighborhood bar in the Easttown area, accompanied by a male acquaintance connected to an upstairs rental on Franklin Street, SE. There's no scene to dramatize here, only a timestamp and a location confirmed by multiple observers. That is how real investigations begin. By morning, the first break in her routine appears. She doesn't make the appointment she had told family about. Calls go unanswered. Texts don't return. In Midwestern cities like Grand Rapids, order is the pulse. When a dependable person misses a fixed commitment, alarms move from personal to procedural. Family members try again, then loop in friends. The objective in these early hours is simple. Fix the last known point, secure any surveillance that might expire, and document who, where, and when without filling blanks with guesses. We anchor 3 facts for you now because they will not change later. Ashley's age and identity, the time window bridging late November 28th to early November 29th, and the link to the Franklin Street SE address through the man she was with. Everything else flows from those anchors. No speculation about cause, no invented motives, no retrofitted narratives. The work ahead is standard for any major case. Preserve video, map movement, and test statements against independent data. If you're watching as a parent or friend, you already know the next impulse. Call again, drive by, try the door, check the usual places. For investigators, the first steps are equally predictable. Confirm the appointment she missed, capture camera angles near the bar before they overwrite, identify vehicles that appear with or near her, and contact the person last seen with her for a voluntary account. The data align too cleanly in these first checks. Sometimes that was the problem. It can suggest that someone had time to think about what to leave behind. We will not jump ahead. There is no chase montage, no sudden confessional. There is a woman with a plan, a documented night out, and a silence that deepens from concerning to critical. Hold on to that, because when a case is built correctly, early discipline becomes later proof. Grand Rapids, Michigan. Morning turns into early afternoon on November 29th, 2018, and a missed appointment becomes a measurable risk. Family members confirm what they can control. The time Ashley Young said she would show, the address where that meeting was supposed to happen, the fact that she is reliable. When routine breaks for a dependable adult, the next step is not speculation. It is documentation. A missing person entry is initiated. Contact attempts are logged. The clock starts on evidence that can disappear without anyone intending to destroy it. Investigators begin with verifiable anchors from the prior night, a bar in the Easttown area, the window bridging late November 28th into the early hours of November 29th, and the man who accompanied her, a tenant linked to an upstairs unit on Franklin Street, SE. They do not announce conclusions. They pull threads that either confirm or disprove assumptions. Who closed out tabs, which exits were used, what vehicles appeared near the bar, and whether any of those vehicles can be matched to known associates. Requests go out to secure surveillance before automated systems overwrite routine footage. Officers canvass adjacent storefronts for additional angles and timestamps. The aim is narrow. Lock the last movements that can be proved independently of anyone's memory. Digital checks begin in parallel because time pressures collide here. A modern missing person file involves call detail records, recent messaging patterns, and bank or card activity to see whether a person is still transacting or communicating. None of those data points explain a disappearance on their own. Together, they build a baseline against which later anomalies can be measured. If a phone goes dark, investigators note when, not why. If a card is dormant, they record the last transaction time and location. If either shows activity, they determine whether it makes sense against the last seen timeline. The work is clinical by design. It's not the job of the early team to feel a story. It's to keep a timeline from collapsing. Contact with the last companion is a priority. At this stage, it's a voluntary interview request. Simple questions first. When they met up, when they separated, where they went in between. Officers are clear about purpose. Verify Ashley's last known movements and check her welfare if she is present. The Franklin Street SE address enters the file not as an accusation, but as a location that must be accounted for alongside the bar. A welfare knock and follow-up requests are standard. Every answer is tested against records pulled from neutral systems, door cameras, traffic cams, receipts. If a statement matches independent data, it stays in the timeline. If it doesn't, it gets flagged for re-interview later. Family and friends provide the domestic context professionals cannot invent. Normal stressors, upcoming plans, who she trusted to pick her up late or to stay over if she felt unsafe, whether she mentioned meeting anyone new. In towns that run on routine, these details aren't gossip. They are the guardrails that help police decide if this is a misunderstanding, a voluntary absence, or something that requires swift escalation. The intake officer explains thresholds. Adults have freedom of movement, and missing does not automatically mean crime. The task is still the same. Fix the last point. Ashley can be placed with confidence, preserve evidence that would otherwise evaporate, and identify the first person with the knowledge to clarify that final window. By the end of day one, the basic tree of possibilities narrows. Ashley did not make the commitment her mother expected. Attempts to reach her have failed. A set of cameras and businesses have been identified to secure footage. A specific residence, the upstairs unit at Franklin Street SE, sits on the map because it is where the last companion lives, not because anyone has declared it a crime scene. That distinction matters. In real work, what you call a place dictates what you can do there, what warrants you seek, and how you'll defend those choices in court. Calling a site a recovery scene or a lead address is not a euphemism. It is legal hygiene that protects the integrity of later steps. If you are watching as someone who has filed a missing person report before, you know this part is all pressure, no payoff. There is no instant resolution. There is just a checklist. Lock video, freeze the timeline, speak to the last companion, verify or contradict each line of their account with neutral data. In Midwestern cities like Grand Rapids, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a quiet community. But in this phase, investigators cannot assume a murder. They can only make sure that if a crime is present, the evidence to prove it will still exist when they find it. Here is the human truth worth keeping in view. The fastest way for families to help is to anchor a loved one's routines, banks, appointments, reliable habits, because those are the first facts that can be tested. The second is to push early for surveillance preservation. Most systems don't wait for a detective to arrive. And the third is to understand why officers keep their language careful. When cases turn criminal, those early words are examined under a microscope. Franklin Street SE sits on the map for one reason. It's where the man last seen with Ashley Young lives, in an upstairs unit of a multi-tenant rental. Detectives don't label it a crime scene. They treat it as a location of interest that must be documented precisely. Geography comes first because it controls every legal and forensic move that follows. The house is divided. A private upstairs apartment occupied by Ashley's last companion, a separate ground-level unit, and a shared basement beneath them. That basement matters. In properties like this, common areas are used by multiple tenants and often contain storage, utilities, and access to trash routes. For investigators, that means two different playbooks. Private spaces generally require a warrant or valid consent from a person with authority. Common areas can be checked under narrower thresholds, especially for welfare concerns or when a resident reports a hazard. The words chosen in reports, lead address, welfare check, common area, aren't semantics. They're the legal scaffolding that protects whatever evidence might be found later. Before any intrusive step, officers do what the law expects. Identify the property owner or manager, confirm who rents which unit, record who has keys and who can grant consent, and sketch a simple floor plan, doors, stairways, the interior route to the shared basement, and any cameras facing entrances. They log the number of tenants, note vehicles typically parked outside, and ask for basic building rules, like whether storage is assigned or communal. That quick snapshot helps control contamination if the case escalates, who has routine access and who does not. Residents have already noticed something unusual. Several complain about a strong, sour odor that doesn't match normal building smells. One neighbor will later testify that the upstairs tenant had made disturbing comments in the past about getting away with it. Statements like that aren't proof on their own, but they go into the file because timing and context can become important at trial. In towns that run on routine, odors get explained: a leaking trash bag, a forgotten fridge, a dead animal. When they persist, people talk. Detectives document when those reports first surfaced and who said what to whom. That timeline either lines up or doesn't with whatever comes next. With the address confirmed, patrol and detectives split tasks. One team maintains contact with family and coordinates the missing person checklist. Surveillance holds near the Easttown bar, phone and financial baselines, and the last companion interview window. Another team focuses on the property. Observe and note without disturbing anything. Request consent from tenants to walk common areas and, when appropriate, conduct a welfare knock at the upstairs unit. The goal isn't dramatic. It's to ensure that if a person inside needs help, they get it. And if no one answers, that step is recorded properly for any later warrant affidavit. Inside the file, the Franklin address becomes a set of boxes to check. Are there cameras on or near the exterior doors? Is there a padlock or code on the basement entry? Who used it last and why? Are there recent maintenance tickets indicating unusual traffic downstairs? These aren't curiosities. They're ways to decide which records to preserve, which people to re-interview, and how quickly to escalate. If a neighbor's report references a particular storage corner, that corner is noted for a consensual visual check if allowed. If the landlord refuses entry without a warrant, that too is documented, so a judge later sees the team followed the rules. This is also the point where the case earns patience. Television makes it look simple. Knock, enter, reveal. Real work is slower, and for good reason. Crossing thresholds improperly can risk every piece of evidence that might be present. So officers build their foundation: who had lawful access, what they saw, when they smelled something, and how long it lasted. They write down exact times. They record names. They avoid conclusions. If this address becomes a recovery site later, the record will show why police were there and what authority they had to act. For families watching, here's the value behind the caution. Cases win or fail on the first pages of the report, the ones that never make the news. The distance between a welfare check and a search warrant is made of small, accurate steps. If the search happens, the defense will test every one of them. The careful pace isn't indifference. It's insurance that whatever is found will hold in court. Back at the station, supervisors watch the Franklin thread in parallel with the missing person timeline from Chapter 2. The two are connected but not yet the same. Ashley Young is still a missing adult, last seen with a resident of this property. The bar footage requests are in, phone and bank baselines are underway, and the first statements from neighbors about odor are now preserved. All of that gives the next shift a defined map: upstairs unit, shared basement, access points, reporting tenants, and the landlord's position on consent. In a moment, this address will move from location of interest to something far more serious. But that move has to be earned lawfully and cleanly. The next chapter isn't about a feeling. It's about what someone found when they followed that smell downstairs, and how a single call changed a missing person case into a homicide investigation. December 2nd, 2018. A tenant at the Franklin Street SE rental follows a worsening odor to the shared basement and places a call to 911. Patrol arrives first. The approach is textbook: isolate the common area, restrict foot traffic, and request detectives and an evidence technician team. No assumptions get written into the record, only what is observed. In a storage corner, officers locate a tarp. Within the same basement area, there is a cardboard box. What is inside those items changes the status of the entire file. The missing person entry no longer stands alone. A suspicious death investigation opens, with the Franklin address now documented as the primary recovery site. From this point forward, procedure governs pace. Technicians photograph the basement exactly as found: angles, distance, condition of containers, proximity to stairs and access doors. Notes capture odor, lighting, temperature, and who discovered what and when. Swabs are taken where appropriate. Possible biological material is preserved under chain of custody. The box contains human remains. A separate section of the basement yields additional material relevant to body handling and cleanup. A reciprocating saw, consistent with dismemberment, is documented among the collected items. Its surfaces and blade areas are treated as potential DNA sources. Paper bags, not plastic, are used to package biological exhibits to prevent condensation that could compromise later analysis. Every label carries time, date, location within the basement, and the collector's initials. Detectives move to stabilize the property. They confirm which tenants have basement access, which spaces are communal versus assigned, and which locks, if any, govern entry. The landlord or manager is contacted to verify unit assignments and the names on leases. The upstairs resident, last known to have been with Ashley Young, is identified for follow-up. Because the find occurs in a shared common area, officers can lawfully secure that space while supervisors coordinate next steps for any private area search. Language remains precise in reports. The basement is the recovery site. No one assigns an unproven cause of death. No one claims a weapon was used until a weapon is located and tested. That restraint is not hesitation. It is the only way to keep evidence admissible when the case reaches a courtroom. At the medical examiner's office, the remains are received under seal. Forensic pathologists begin what will become a critical conclusion. The decedent is identified as Ashley Young through standard comparative methods. The examination also confirms what is not available. The head, hands, and feet are not among the recovered remains. That absence will matter. Without the head, cause of death can be more difficult to establish, and many classic trauma signatures cannot be evaluated. Even so, homicide investigations in the United States routinely proceed on the strength of totality. Recovery circumstances, associated tools, cleanup indicators, and post-event conduct may collectively meet the legal burden, even when some anatomical evidence is missing. Back at Franklin, detectives document cleaning agents and trash handling materials consistent with attempts to alter or move evidence. This is recorded as observation, not argument. They diagram interior paths, stairs from the upstairs unit, hallway access to the basement door, and the path from that door to the storage area where items were found. Neighbors are re-interviewed with fresh specificity. Who noticed the odor first? When did it intensify? Did anyone see bags, boxes, or tools being carried at unusual hours? Even small details, like which tenants use which corner for storage, become important to show who had routine control of the areas where the remains were located. The upstairs resident is detained for questioning. Early charges are tactical and narrow. Michigan practice allows prosecutors to file counts supported by immediate evidence, mutilation, disinterment, and concealment of a death, while testing and interviews continue. This is not overreach. It is a way to hold a person of interest while lab results and additional witness statements are gathered. The key distinction is maintained in every document. The basement is the recovery site. The cause of death is undetermined pending further analysis, and there is no recovered weapon. Those three facts will be repeated consistently throughout the case. Chain of custody is audited before anyone leaves the property. Each exhibit is logged from scene to lab, with signatures that show accountability at every handoff. Detectives lock in a timeline of who was inside the basement after police arrived and who remained outside the cordon. If any officer crossed the threshold without booties or gloves before the scene was secured, that fact would be noted too. The integrity of this paper trail isn't busy work. It's what keeps evidence from being suppressed months later under a defense challenge. In towns like Grand Rapids, communities expect both speed and care. Families want answers. Juries demand proof. Those aims are not in conflict when investigators follow process. The choice to write recovery site instead of crime scene at this stage is deliberate. Once searches expand to private areas, any warrant application will need to show exactly why those areas are connected to the body handling evidence downstairs. Judges read those affidavits line by line. So will jurors if a motion later challenges the search. Precision now is strength later. As the day closes, the case file holds new verifiable facts. The date and time of the 911 call, the precise location of the remains within a shared basement, the recovery of a reciprocating saw and other items consistent with dismemberment and cleanup, and the absence of the head, hands, and feet. The medical examiner's office has begun work. Prosecutors are briefed on initial charging options, and detectives have scheduled follow-ups tied to the property and to the last movements established in chapters 1 through 3. The missing person report did not disappear. It became the front page of a homicide investigation. There is a human reality underneath the legal language. Someone followed an odor that seemed wrong and acted. That choice preserved a scene and started a paper trail sturdy enough to withstand scrutiny. If you live in shared housing, you already know this truth. Reporting what doesn't fit isn't being nosy. It is how people protect each other when the stakes are life and death. The shift from recovery to proof begins with a clock. After the remains are found in the shared basement at Franklin Street, SE, detectives move to preserve every second of footage that can lock the route from the eastbound bar to that address. Bar DVRs overwrite quickly. Requests go out the same day to secure the video, export it with embedded timecode, and obtain a chain of custody receipt from the manager. Investigators verify whether the system clock had drifted. If it has, they note the offset so a midnight timestamp on video aligns with real time on phone records and receipts. Across the street and 2 doors down, small storefront cameras catch doorways and sidewalks. Transit and traffic cameras provide fixed-angle snapshots. This isn't a cinematic montage. It's a grid of timestamps that either agrees with the last companion's account or doesn't. From the bar, the footage shows Ashley in the late window bridging November 28th into the early hours of November 29th. Clothing description, posture, who is beside her. These details will later be shown to a jury because they're neutral. The lens doesn't guess. Investigators map likely footpaths from the bar to a vehicle or rideshare pickup point, then to the Franklin address. If a car is involved, they look for the make, model, and color in adjacent clips, then confirm with registration data and interviews. Each confirmed sighting earns a log entry with minute and second. The strength of a circumstantial case is that it doesn't depend on a single dramatic piece. It depends on how many independent systems point the same way. Digital checks run parallel. Call detail records for Ashley's phone and the last companion's phone are obtained under lawful process. Analysts note the final outgoing or incoming activity for her device and compare it to the window on video. If the handset goes dark after the early hours of November 29th, that time is recorded. Investigators review messaging activity for cadence changes, sudden stop, unusual phrasing, or a device switching to Wi-Fi only. Bank and card records are pulled for the same purpose. Routine purchases stop, advance withdrawals fail to appear, or a known pattern continues with no new entries. None of these data points prove homicide alone. Together, they show whether a person continued living in the ordinary ways, paying for food, messaging friends, or whether everything halted after the last seen moment. The last companion is interviewed again. Early answers matter less than whether they survive comparison to independent data. Where did you both go after the bar? When did you part ways? Which door did you use? Did you drive or walk? The tone stays clinical. Detectives aren't searching for a confession. They're aligning or flagging. If a person claims they left at one time but the bar's export shows both parties exiting later than that, it's documented as a discrepancy. If they say the bar was the last contact but a storefront camera records the same 2 individuals passing within a time window consistent with leaving together, the video goes into evidence. The data align too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. Clean lines can indicate planning, not clarity. Witnesses fill gaps the cameras miss. A resident recalls the upstairs tenant asking for help related to Ashley's car in the days that follow. That resident's account is taken down in a sworn statement with specifics: date, time window, what was said, what was done. Detectives look for footage that corroborates any reported movement of her vehicle, pulled from the curb, repositioned to a less visible spot, or moved to an area not typically used by that tenant. If a camera captured a distinct bumper sticker or a broken taillight, those markers become valuable. Even when license plates aren't legible, unique damage can identify a car across clips. The medical examiner's preliminary work informs the legal strategy but does not dictate it. Identification of the decedent as Ashley Young is made and communicated. Absence of the head, hands, and feet is confirmed. Without those anatomical parts, cause of death remains undetermined, a fact that will be emphasized by the defense later. Prosecutors and detectives know that in Michigan, jurors can still convict on second-degree murder when cause isn't pinpointed, provided the totality of evidence proves unlawful killing beyond a reasonable doubt. The approach here is exactly that. Build a mosaic, last seen proof, property access, recovery context, associated tools, cleanup indicators, and post-event behavior that supports the inference of homicide. Rideshare data, if used that night, is requested. Even a no-ride requested result has value. It eliminates a path. Traffic cams on the route toward Franklin are checked for a vehicle that matches what's tied to the last companion. If the car's path appears more than once in a span that fits the night's timeline, first toward the address, later away at unusual hours, that pattern gets flagged for the affidavit. Detectives also search for private cameras that point toward dumpsters or alleys along the block. In cases involving body handling, refuse routes sometimes matter. The goal is not to preview the next chapter, it's to make sure the present one holds. The interview with the upstairs tenant tightens. Statements about where he slept, whether anyone else visited, and if the basement was used for storage are compared to the property manager's records and neighbor accounts. If he says he rarely used the basement, but a neighbor says they saw him in the hallway with trash bags at odd hours, the neighbor's observation is recorded and set next to any matching timestamps. If he says he never touched Ashley's vehicle after that night, but a witness says he asked for help getting into it, that contradiction is bracketed by whatever cameras can show about the car's movement. The technique isn't complicated, it's repetition under pressure. Assertions are tested against records that don't care who wins the case. By early January 2019, the record supports escalation. Initial counts tied to body handling, disinterment, mutilation, and concealing a death are joined by charges that reflect the homicide theory and evidence tampering. This isn't guesswork. The charging instrument cites the timeline, the recovery in the shared basement, the saw and cleanup indicators, witness statements about vehicle movement, and the last seen footage. Prosecutors do not claim to have a murder weapon. They affirm that none was recovered. They do not claim to know a specific mechanism of death. They point to the combination of recovery circumstances and conduct afterward as proof that a homicide occurred and that the person charged is responsible. Sometimes viewers want a single silver bullet, a fingerprint on a blade, a text that reads like a confession. Real cases often don't offer that. What convinces a jury is the agreement among things that can't collude. Video systems, electronic records, independent witnesses. When those systems line up while a story keeps changing, jurors draw conclusions. And when the story stays rigid but the systems contradict it, they draw conclusions faster. The work of this chapter is simply that. Make the path from the bar to Franklin visible. Make the movements around Ashley's car transparent. And make any mismatch in statements obvious without editorializing. There's a small, human reason to explain this emphasis on neutral sources. Families deserve answers that don't depend on anyone's mood or memory. Answers that would be the same if you disliked the accused or if you didn't. Cameras don't care. Timestamps don't care. When a case stakes itself on those parts, the outcome respects both the victim and the process meant to speak for them. December 1st, 2018. One day before the basement discovery, investigators reconstruct a sequence they will later describe in court as post-offense conduct. Phone pings, traffic cams, and sworn statements place the defendant's parents traveling from Holland, Michigan to the Franklin Street SE address in Grand Rapids. Prosecutors will call it the Holland Run. The language in the file stays careful. This is the state's timeline derived from interviews, business records, and surveillance holds, not a motive statement. What matters is movement and custody of items. According to testimony and reports, family members arrive at the Franklin property and help relocate materials from the upstairs unit toward vehicles and back again. A box with a bag, a reciprocating saw, cleaning agents, a shower curtain, and women's boots are noted across witness accounts and investigative summaries. Detectives chart each claim transfer, who lifted it, where it went, which door was used, how long it was out of sight. They then hunt for camera angles that can support or contradict those steps, driveways, alley approaches, municipal cams facing intersections used to enter or leave the block. When a clip shows a vehicle matching the family's car pausing near a dumpster site within the same window, that timestamp gets paired with the statement that referenced a trash stop. The point is not to label intent, it's to map behavior. There is also a brief stop at a police station recorded in the state's narrative. Detectives don't guess at purpose. They pin it to time and route. The sequence continues with unloading back at Franklin. Each segment is evaluated against what was recovered in the shared basement the next day. Would any item seen or described plausibly connect to handling or cleanup? If a witness says a saw was present during the trip, analysts ask whether the saw documented during the December 2nd recovery could be the same make and condition. If someone mentions a shower curtain, detectives check purchase histories or trash pulls for packaging that fits. These are not conclusions. They are links a jury can test later. The interviews that generate this timeline are taken under oath. When two accounts diverge, both are preserved. If a parent cannot recall a specific stop, but cell site data shows a short dwell near a dumpster, the discrepancy is flagged rather than argued. If a witness claims the family brought items out and back in the same day, analysts compare that claim to any footage showing doorways, hallways, and stairwell traffic. In a case where the head, hands, and feet were not recovered and no weapon was found, behavior around tools and refuse carries weight. It doesn't replace cause of death, it strengthens the total picture of what happened after. Why include a family run at all? Because post-event choices are admissible indicators of consciousness of guilt when they are tied to physical evidence. Jurors don't need speculation, they need verified steps. Here, those steps begin in Holland, pass through Grand Rapids, touch public spaces where cameras don't lie, and return to the address already on the map. That is why the Holland run sits between the digital mosaic and the courtroom. It is the bridge from what the systems recorded to what people did when they thought no one was watching. There's a human note worth stating plainly. Families often act to protect their own. But helping is not a defense if what's being carried is evidence. If something about a loved one's request feels wrong, late-night trips, sealed boxes, a sudden insistence on dumpsters, report it. Early, specific reporting can be the difference between speculation and proof. Courtroom Grand Rapids, September 2019. Before a word goes to the jury, the rules are set. The judge admits a limited set of graphic photographs. Probative value outweighs prejudice, with strict instructions on how they may be considered. A plea that would have required the defendant to disclose where unrecovered remains could be found is rejected. The case proceeds to trial. The standard is the same one every Michigan jury gets: proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and for second-degree murder, an unlawful killing done with malice, without premeditation. The state's presentation is methodical. Jurors see the timeline that begins at an Easttown bar late November 28th into the early hours of November 29th, 2018. They watch exports from DVR systems and neighboring cameras showing movement consistent with Ashley Young and the man who lived upstairs at the Franklin Street SE address. Analysts explain clock drift and time code corrections so video aligns with phone and card data. The medical examiner confirms identification of the decedent as Ashley and documents what is missing. The head, hands, and feet were not recovered. The examiner testifies that cause of death cannot be determined from the available remains. An absence the state addresses directly, not as a weakness to hide, but as a fact to weigh alongside everything else. Jurors hear how the shared basement at Franklin becomes the primary recovery site on December 2nd. A tarp, a cardboard box containing human remains, and a reciprocating saw documented with chain of custody integrity. Crime lab personnel describe swabbing, packaging, labeling, and custody logs. The point isn't drama, it's admissibility. The state's theory, carefully labeled as such, is that violence occurred in the upstairs unit and that evidence was handled and moved downstairs into the common area. Neighbors report odor, unusual hours, and a request involving Ashley's vehicle. A resident describes being asked for help accessing that car. Camera clips and time-stamped observations show it later positioned out of easy view. The Holland run comes next. Phone records, route evidence, and testimony place the defendant's parents traveling from Holland to the Franklin address on December 1st, with items tied to cleanup and disposal, a brief stop at a police station, and returns to the property. Prosecutors frame that sequence as post-offense conduct. Consciousness of guilt, not proof of the homicide mechanism. The defense stays on message. No murder weapon recovered. Critical anatomical parts missing. Cause of death undetermined. Counsel urges jurors to reject inference and demand direct proof of how Ashley died. Cross-examination presses analysts on margins of error and the specificity of video at night. On the Holland run, the defense argues innocent explanations exist for moving boxes and household items. For the basement, they stress that common spaces are used by multiple tenants. In instructions, the judge separates the counts. For second-degree murder, jurors are told they may use circumstantial evidence. The law does not require a specific instrument of death if the totality proves an unlawful killing. For disinterment, mutilation, concealing a death, and evidence tampering, the elements are tied to handling and movement of remains and associated materials. The state asks jurors to evaluate systems that do not collude. Video, digital records, sworn witness statements, against shifting statements the investigation recorded. The defense asks them to hold to the absence of a mechanism. Deliberations do not replay every exhibit. They test whether independent sources align and whether that alignment, plus conduct after the fact, crosses the threshold. On September 13, 2019, the jury returns guilty on second-degree murder, disinterment, mutilation, concealing a death, and tampering with evidence. One ending, one record. The law moves next to sentencing. Grand Rapids, October 10, 2019. The courtroom is full, but controlled. After the jury's September verdict, the law moves to its final arithmetic. The judge weighs the recovery in the shared basement on Franklin Street, SE, the handling of remains, and the refusal to reveal where unrecovered parts could be found. The sentence is pronounced 100 to 200 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections, functionally a life term. It is not a number thrown for effect. It is a measure that ensures public safety and acknowledges a family's permanent loss. Impact statements are short and direct. They remind the court that legal outcomes do not replace a person. They also fix a point that will never change. Ashley Young is not a case file. She is a daughter and a friend whose remains were not fully returned. The court's language reflects that reality. The harm extends beyond the homicide to the deliberate concealment that denies closure. Appeals follow. They always do in a serious felony. In January 2021, the Michigan Court of Appeals affirms the convictions and the sentence. Later in 2021, the Michigan Supreme Court denies further review. Nothing in those decisions softens the record. The convictions stand, the term stands, and the legal path forward narrows to post-conviction remedies that do not disturb the verdict. As of 2025, the defendant remains in MDOC custody. There is no second ending. One result related to the Holland timeline arrives in a different courtroom. On June 5, 2020, the defendant's mother, Barbara Chance, pleads no contest to accessory perjury and serves a short jail term with probation. The father, James Chance, is convicted of accessory after the fact perjury and receives local time with probation. Those outcomes are separate. They do not change the homicide judgment. They exist because juries are allowed to consider post-offense conduct when it is tied to physical evidence and sworn testimony. The medical examiner's findings never expanded beyond what the body could offer. Identification was made, head, hands, and feet were not recovered, no weapon was found. The state did not pretend otherwise. Instead, investigators relied on systems that do not negotiate, synchronized video, phone, and financial records, and corroborated witness accounts. The jury accepted that mosaic. The appellate courts found no reversible error in how it was built or presented. There is a civic truth worth carrying out of this case. Neighbors who speak up about something that doesn't fit, an odor, unusual traffic, late-night trips to dumpsters, are not being dramatic. They are preserving evidence that would otherwise vanish. Families who report a dependable adult missing and push to save surveillance in the first hours are not overreacting. They are protecting a timeline a jury can later trust. These are practical acts of care that matter long after headlines fade. There is also a limit to what courts can repair. A sentence can mark guilt and protect the public. It cannot deliver the rest of Ashley home. That unresolved fact will always sit beside the legal outcome. Justice here is firm and final. It is not complete. In towns like Grand Rapids, that difference is understood. Cases end on paper, and families keep living with what paper cannot change. As I close this case, I'm reminded that justice is never just about courtrooms or verdicts. It's about the families left behind, the neighbors who pay attention, and the choices we make to protect each other. Ashley's story shows how quickly trust can be broken and how vital it is to act when something feels wrong. What do you believe justice should look like when the full truth is withheld? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear where you're watching from. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next case we cover together.